Good evening, everybody. I'm John Guandola with Understanding the Threat. Thanks to all of you who are on the call right now and all of you who will be listening in the future and those of you watching. I am really honored tonight to have a good friend of mine and, in my opinion, a great asset, not only to the United States, but to our global effort to put freedom back on the offensive where it belongs. A man who, in my opinion, doesn't get nearly enough credit, and I know he's not looking for credit, but really credit for being a phenomenal source of information on the communists and the communist movement in North America, in Europe, and elsewhere, and that's Trevor Loudon. So Trevor, welcome. And what I'd like to do is, with regards to everything that you all have been witnessing over the last few days across America, I just want to say a couple sentences, and then I want to ask Trevor questions, and then let the people on the call ask questions. And so what I'll do is we'll make it Trevor and I will have a little discussion. I'd like to open it up for questions and then get back into it and kind of go back and forth like that, because I think when we have an opportunity like this to have a great discussion, it can really go in a bunch of different directions. So over the last few days, here's what we watched. Almost instantly, in dozens of cities across the United States, there was a coordinated and organized effort for violent rioters to launch attacks in cities across the United States. And the only tipping of my hand that I'm going to give is I'm going to say this. These were not, as some people have said, including our leaders, these were not peaceful protests that were hijacked by crazy lunatics who were just out of their minds. And while there were crazy people, we are talking about something that is much more organized and sinister than that. And the reason I can say that is because 5 years ago, we wrote about it. 5 years ago, Trevor Loudon wrote about it and talked about it. Steve Coughlin wrote about it and talked about it. Those of us following this movement have been watching. We knew this was coming. We actually said sometime in 2019, 2020 was when we were going to see this spark, and we saw it. We saw it in 2018 with a partial version of this in places like Charlotte, New York, Ferguson, Charlottesville, otherwise. But this is what we have been talking about. But even this is not the main event. So welcome, Trevor Loudon. And what I'd like to do is just give you an open-ended question. From your perspective, Trevor, why don't you share with us what you think is going on and who the main players are?
Yeah, well, look, President Trump has a lot of enemies around the world, particularly in China, Russia, Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela. And these people do not want to see 4 more years of this guy in the White House. They had a president that would give them everything they wanted, and now they've got a president who won't. A president who's actually making big trouble for them and could actually see them deposed. So they have a very strong vested interest in making sure he does not get re-elected. Now, they've done all sorts of scams, Russia collusion, they've done voter fraud, they've done a big voter registration drives in Black and Latino communities. But to actually finish this off, they are aiming to completely squash any economic recovery from the COVID virus, create chaos across the country, and especially blame it on Trump. This is a communist insurrection. That's what it is. And it's been planned, as John said, for a very long time. They were coming into 2020. They knew they had to do this. If they can, they will carry this on to full-blown revolution, you know, because there's more, as John said, there's more to come. And if it gets squashed, you know, and President Trump's showing some resolve here and invoking the Insurrection Act of 1807 and giving warning to the governors to sort this out. I think we can expect to see more terrorism type activity, maybe even a war with Iran. But whatever, it will be things designed to destroy this president. So what we're seeing is a political, economic, cultural, and military campaign to bring down the United States economy and the President of the United States to usher in a new order. And the Islamists and the communists are cooperating fully on this. And this is not a bunch of people letting off steam because they've been cooped up too long with coronavirus, as Tucker Carlson seems to think. This is an organized military campaign to create chaos and to bring this country to its knees in every way they can. And it's been building. It's been going for a long time, and now it's here. And we're in for a long, hot summer unless this is dealt with very, very firmly and very, very quickly. That's in a nutshell, that's what's going on.
Okay, so that is very helpful for setting the table. If I can use that analogy, Trevor, thank you for that. What do you think? Give us how this plays out. Talk about some of the players on the ground, some of the organizations in the United States that concern you, and I'm specifically asking about Marxist communist organizations, and a few of the key leaders, and then I'd like to take it down into the ground, but start with organizations and key leaders that are involved and who you think we should be keeping an eye on.
Well, the two main groups that are organizing this, see, the talk's all about Antifa, Antifa this, Antifa that. And Antifa is part of the mix. But these guys are not smart enough to organize something this concerted on all over the country without a lot of help. But the real people organizing this, in my opinion, are two Maoist communist groups, both aligned to the People's Republic of China. One of them is the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, which is strongest in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And the other is Liberation Road. Used to be also called Freedom Road Socialist Organization. So there's a lot of confusion here. This was one organization. They split in 1998. They both kept the same name, but thankfully in April this year, one of the factions changed their name to Liberation Road. So I'll give a little bit of a rundown of what they're about. They both came out of the student movement of the 1960s, the SDS, the Weather Underground, the Maoist, pro-Viet Cong, pro-Chinese student radical movement of the 60s. And through the 80s, they split up into various groups, Communist Party of America, Marxist-Leninist, League of Revolutionary Struggle, Communist Workers' Party, New American Movement. And as they faded away, they coalesced into the Freedom Road Socialist Organization in 1985. Now, they had a split in 1998, and the split was one faction wanted to stay traditionally Maoist, street fighting, racial agitation, didn't want to really be involved too much in electoral politics. And this is the group that split off in the Midwest, around Joe Ias Baker, Mick Kelly, and a few others. And they run the radical movements in Chicago, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, places like that. Also have some strength in northern Florida, in the Bay Area, but the Midwest is their headquarters. Now, they are strictly Maoist. They ran the protest against President Trump at the Republican Party convention in 2016, for instance. They are the ones who basically stirred up all the trouble when this young guy got killed by the cop in Minnesota. That was them, completely them. In 2019, they set up a group called the...
I would like you to say that again for the audience.
Yeah, that was them. They organized all of that response to that real quick. And in 2019, they set up a group called the National Alliance Against Racial and Political Oppression, NAPRA. and it's named after a Communist Party front group of the same name in the 1960s that used to be headed by Angela Davis. You all remember Angela with the big afro? Well, she headed that. They reincarnated it in 2019 for this purpose, right? Because it's all about black coming against black, police brutality, institutional racism, and they've got groups all over the country now. And wherever we've had most of these riots, that's where they've had their groups, especially in the Midwest. And so they set that up under a guy called Frank Chapman, a jailed murderer who was a Communist Party member and then joined Freedom Road, and Mick Kelly and a few others. But this is a small cadre of people. In 2010, the Justice Department arrested 21 of their members and charged them with aiding and abetting the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the FARC in Colombia. And they were all due to be indicted because they obviously were guilty, but Eric Holder was the Attorney General at the time, and Obama was their friend, so none of them went to court. So that's one faction. They control a lot of the stuff in the Midwest, and they have various branches in Dallas. They have branches in, in other groups around the country. Democratic Socialists of America is helping them. The Communist Party USA is a little bit involved too, but their main, this is Freedom Road, and they have people in China right now. They've had 5 delegations in Venezuela this year, in the last 6 months. So they are heavily tied into the international communist movement, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, etc. Now, the other group, the other split off, which is now called Liberation Road, in 2014, these are the people who gave you the Ferguson riots. They had a big branch in Missouri, they ran a group called the Organization of Black Struggle, and that ran the Ferguson riots. These are the people that gave you the Black Lives Matter organization. That was a front group for Liberation Road, completely a front group. All 3 of the founders, they weren't the 3 black chicks who got around and thinking, we better think up a hashtag because a lot of our brothers are getting killed by the police. These were 3 hardcore communist revolutionaries who started a program. Now, just a little point here. This could have happened anywhere because they know every year 5 or 6 black guys get killed by the police, right? So we just got to get one that sparks it. So they tried to do it in Atlanta with that guy who is so-called jogging, but that didn't work. So now they got onto this one, which was much more egregious and much more public and harder to, you couldn't defend it at all. So it was a perfect spark. But just remember how this goes. We all know the story of Rosa Parks, right? Rosa Parks was tired one night and she just sat on the front of a bus in Alabama. She wasn't going to go down the back, and she got arrested, and that sparked the civil rights movement. Just some poor seamstress, right? No, Rosa Parks was a fully trained communist revolutionary. That was her 5th attempt to get this going. She used to go down the back of the bus every time, but they usually ignored her. But this time she got arrested, and that sparked it off. Now, I'm not condemning the civil rights movement because we know that it was a necessary thing, but we have to understand that it was manipulated heavily by communists. They didn't just want civil rights, they wanted revolution. And Rosa Parks was part of that. Martin Luther King was part of that. So this is what they do. They keep doing it, this stunt. They keep doing the same stunt over and over again till finally it sparks. So this was no accident. So Liberation Road has got heavy ties to China. They're sending people to China all the time. They do a lot of electoral work. They're the ones who flipped Virginia from red to blue by signing up 200,000 minority voters with maps provided by one of their comrades who works out of Wuhan, the geography department of Wuhan University in China, right? So this is what they are doing, and they have groups all over the country. They're very strong in Kentucky, where they had riots. They're very strong in Tennessee, in Nashville, where they had riots. They're very strong in Atlanta. They're strong in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, where they've also had riots. This Liberation Road works mainly in the Bay Area, which they pretty much run San Francisco, but they work very heavily in North Carolina, where they pretty much control Durham, North Carolina. They work in Virginia, where they had the big riots in Richmond, where one of their headquarters is, and they are very active in Florida, Georgia, Alabama to a degree, and very much so in Tennessee and Memphis, where they also had riots. So these things are all controlled by Chinese Communist parties. And if you just think about this, you know, we just had the COVID virus, which came from China, and that destroyed the economy, which destroyed Trump's main asset, his main bragging thing. Now, if you sink the US economy, you also you destroy President Trump, but you also destroy the US military budget. Obama destroyed the US military. Trump was trying to rebuild it. But you can't do that in the middle of a depression. So just after this, 30 Democrats, many connected to Liberation Road or the Communist Party, like Barbara Lee, wrote a letter to the Armed Services Committee demanding cuts in the US military budget in the next budget round. And so we're just starting to come out of COVID, and what do? We get slammed with rioting all around the country, instigated by pro-Chinese communist parties. You know, I'll read some of the names of these people. You know, like I've got them down. These people were on a call the other night, and I was listening in. But you know, in Kentucky, you've got Chanel Helm, who runs Black Lives Matter in Louisville. In New York, you've got one of the leaders is Lumumba Bandele, a strategist of the Movement for Black Lives, which is an offshoot of Black Lives Matter, controlled by Liberation Road. You also got Carissa Lewis, who heads the Movement for Black Lives. Tiffany Roberts, who runs Just Georgia. Kayla Reed, who runs Action St. Louis and was part of Organization for Black Struggle. You've got Philip Agnew from Dream Defenders in Florida, who went to Palestine twice to meet with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and was a surrogate for Bernie Sanders. You got Chinyere Tutashinda from the Blackout Collective, part of Black Lives Matter. You got Miski Noor from Minnesota, who is also part of this group, part of Black Lives Matter, and used to work as an assistant for Keith Ellison. So this is the kind of connections these people have and the kind of networks they have, and they all owe allegiance to the People's Republic of China, effectively. So that's pretty long-winded, but I think it gives a bit of a rundown who these people are, John.
No, thank you. That's exactly what I was hoping to kind of go to the next level. That's excellent. I want to interject, and just for the folks watching, this is really important. And from the experience that we've had at understanding the threat, my experiences in the government and the FBI and the DOD, and I'm going to ask you this question on your experience with this, but from my experiences working with citizens, and my experiences working with FBI agents, military, including military intelligence guys from DIA, and I can tell you from that perspective, there's no understanding of these movements. We used to have, before the Church Commission in the mid-70s, the Defense Intelligence Agency could actually operate in the neighborhood around military bases to do counterintelligence, to see if intelligence officers, and of course they would, right? And let me just say, for those of you watching that don't understand, if I'm a Chinese, a Cuban, a Saudi, a Russian agent, intelligence agent, or intelligence officer, and I want information, I'm going to go to the places where people that are in certain parts of the military hang out. Let me give you a clue. That's why Saudi Arabia is spending so much time and effort in San Angelo, Texas at Goodfellow Air Force Base, because that's where the U.S. Air Force trains its intelligence officers.
Yeah. And that's why the Cubans are moving into Tampa.
That's right.
Because Tampa is a huge military center.
And it's Special Operations Command in Tampa.
Yes, yes.
Right? So, but we don't think like that. And the other thing, and this is getting to the question, is the way, and this is for the viewers, the way your average military officer, and I really go to the battalion commander, regimental commander, and division commander, the way they view warfare is tanks, artillery, aircraft, soldiers. That's how they view warfare. How do I use naval gunfire? How do I synergize all my efforts? That is an incredibly small part of how this enemy intends to win the war. The communist movement, primarily led by China, but these organizations in the United States, which are some directly allied to China, some not, and the Islamic movement, primarily in North America, led by the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood, North American Muslim Brotherhood, but you have Iranian assets, you've got Deobandis, you've got all kinds of assets, and they're all working together. And when I say that, they're working together to the point that they have meetings, they sit face to face, they do phone conferences. And the problem is your intelligence agencies, and I will say this very clearly, there is no competent counterintelligence apparatus in the United States.
Yep.
None. So if you say, well, I thought the FBI has a counterintelligence division, they do. The same counterintelligence division that launched a coup against the president of the United States. Hello?
Yeah.
So
look, I'm sure they could tell you all about the Tea Party.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure they've got that well infiltrated.
Yeah. So Trevor, I would like for you, just from your perspective, one of the hardest things that I've encountered for people both inside and outside the government, citizens, even probably some people on this call, to really grasp is even people that study this find it so hard to believe that this is so well coordinated and well orchestrated. So when you talk about the communist movement, and you seem to know what you're talking about, but it just seems like a conspiracy theory. It's so well coordinated, well strategized. Where do you get all this information, and how have you over the years put this all together?
Well, look, it started out examining the situation in New Zealand, because the communists basically ran my country for several years in the 80s, to the point they cancelled, they destroyed our military alliance with the United States. But I interviewed a man at that time who had actually infiltrated the New Zealand Communist Party and spent considerable time training in Moscow at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning. They had 6,000 communists there, all working on racial agitation, labor union manipulation, manipulating political parties, espionage, sabotage. But as you say, most of it is not kinetic. 98% of what the Muslims and the communists do is influence operations, espionage, infiltration, commercial warfare, things like that. So we got all our military focused on 2% of the problem.
That's right.
And we've got our universities and our businesses and our government awash with our enemies, while we've got guys over in Iraq blowing up, winning the war on the kinetic front, while we're losing it massively on the information and propaganda front at home. See, I've got a website, KeyWiki, KEYWIKI, and it's public, and I've got 128,000 files on that. So my wife and I go to libraries, we go to archives, we take photographs of old left-wing magazines, and we put these names into the database, and they start linking up. You start getting blue links like in Wikipedia. And so we can find the networks that way. Like I've put in over 30,000 members of Democratic Socialists of America in this country, over 5,000 members of the Communist Party, hundreds of members of CARE, Freedom Road, Liberation Road. And guess what? They overlap all the time. CARE overlaps with the Communist Party, it overlaps with DSA, it overlaps with, CARE overlaps with Freedom Road, the Workers' World Party. There's a matrix of these organizations, and we map them out and we put it out there. But see, what happened in the 70s, the Church Commission, Senator Church from Idaho, destroyed a lot of America's, intelligence capability, betrayed thousands of secrets, sent many people to their deaths. This guy was a traitor, in my opinion. He was a leftist at Stanford University, and I believe he did what he did on the command from somewhere else. John Conyers, who was almost certainly a Soviet agent on the Judiciary Committee, very heavily involved with the Muslim Brotherhood, involved with Democratic Socialists of America, the Communist Party USA, headed the Judiciary Committee for years. And he abolished the House Un-American Activities Committee back in the 1970s. In the same period of time, all the police intelligence departments that had been operating around the country. Chicago had its Red Squad that went after communists and anarchists. New York is about the only major city now that has a police intelligence department, but they were all over. So you had local guys with their finger on the pulse all over the country. They knew the local radicals. They knew when somebody was coming into town. The Northern California Communist Party in the 1950s was led by 5 members. 3 of them were FBI informants, okay? The FBI had them. The local intelligence people had them under control. But all those police intelligence departments were abolished in the 70s and the 80s, almost. The FBI was diverted after J. Edgar Hoover died. They basically left communists alone. Pretty much let them go. And the CIA has been so penetrated for years and so neutralized for years and so full of liberals for years that it's worse than useless in a lot of aspects. They'll go after terrorists or people who actually blow stuff up. But you tell them to mount an influence operation against the Iranians who have bought the votes of 7 US senators to pass an Iranian deal, an Iranian nuke deal. You tell them to do that and see what they wouldn't even contemplate it. They haven't investigated. Sorry?
They wouldn't know how to do it.
They wouldn't know how, and they wouldn't dare to do it. You think, right now the Judiciary Committee, right, is run by Jerry Nadler and Judy Chu. Now, Jerry Nadler is a long-time member of Democratic Socialists of America. Judy Chu came out of the Communist Workers' Party, a pro-Chinese group. So the FBI comes to the Judiciary Committee and says, look, we understand there's about 100 Congress members who are working for the other team, taking money from the Iranians, working with the communists, working with the Chinese. This is a problem. We need to start investigating these people. And by the way, Mrs. Chu and Mr. Nadler, you're on the list. Is that all right? How's that going to go? So this is why we are completely undefended from infiltration. There is no barrier to infiltration in this country. Senators routinely work with CARE. Senators take money from Iran. They don't care because nobody's going to call them to account for it. Republicans wouldn't even know what's going on, and the Democrats are complicit. And some of the Republicans are complicit too. But that's just the thing that people need to get their heads around. America has abandoned internal security. It was gutted by left-wingers in our government, aided by communists and Muslim Brotherhood types, and now they've actually infiltrated them to the point they can mount an investigation into a sitting president, and CARE can dictate what the FBI investigates and what it doesn't. That's where we are in America today. And it has not improved greatly under Trump. For all the good things he's done, that's something that still needs to be handled.
Yes. Well, I want to cap what you just said. Thank you. That was an excellent, the way you packaged that was excellent for the listeners and the viewers. So again, I want to make a couple points with what Trevor just said. The counterintelligence apparatus in the U.S. government is broken. It's non-existent. It's not functional. And when people say, well, why doesn't Mr. Trump do X, Y, or Z? And the thing you need to keep in mind is when he pushes in to the components of government, he's pushing into a component of government that has been severely compromised by communists and jihadis. So when you say, we've got all this evidence, you all on this channel on Encounter Truth have heard me and my team members say that when you look at why aren't we doing this? Why don't we do that? We hear this from people all over the country. Why don't we do this? Why doesn't the president do this? Why doesn't the president designate the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization? Okay, let's say today, in 10 minutes, he did that. Now what? How many police and federal agents and intelligence officers in the United States could speak accurately and intelligently for more than 4 seconds about the Islamic network in the United States, the Muslim Brotherhood, how they operate, modus operandi, doctrine, how they communicate, how they operate, how they plan operations? You're talking about a number between 0 and 5 people. That's how bad it is. So when Trevor says what he's saying, he's not being, we had on our Train the Trainer program here on Encounter Truth several weeks ago, the former director of strategic planning for the National Security Council, Richard Higgins. And in response to some questions, he said out of over 300 people on the National Security Council, there are probably 9 that could even participate in a conversation like we're having, and they all don't understand it at the depth that we're talking right now.
And many of them are working for the other team.
Right.
Many of them are leftists.
Therein lies the problem. The idea of counterintelligence and espionage operations and influence, and Trevor brought up the word Mao, the name Mao, Maoist. Well, when we talk about the model or the format for this entire communist and jihadi movement, it's Mao's political warfare model. It's the counter state. It's the covert unit that operates within a state to grow like a cancer and overtake the state. And you have a communist counter state and an Islamic counter state in the United States. Both individually are deadly to us, and as fast and as rapidly as they're going. And the fact they're literally on the precipice of doing what they achieved. But now we know that, we've known for a long time, they're working together. So what I want to do is I want to pause right now, and we're going to just do a few minutes of questions. Trevor and I will try to answer questions briefly, and then we're going to share. I'm going to ask him a couple more things, and then we'll do another Q&A before time ends here. So does anybody have questions for Trevor or myself? Okay. Ron, go ahead with your question.
From what you're describing, how do we work to counter the counter state? You've got, it seems like the only person we have any hope with are possibly the president if we ever get through to him, and maybe Louis Gohmert and some others who might understand the realities, and I'm not sure he does, but I think he comes close.
Yeah.
Where do we go to work to counter the problem?
Okay, Trevor, will you take that first?
Yeah, well, I think, we've got a very urgent job on our hands right now. While we have a friendly president in the White House, at least we have a fighting chance. And I think with the well, I think when Trump got into office, he thought he would just be a businessman and issue an order and it would be done, like it would in his company. And when he encountered the depth of rebellion and stonewalling and this kind of thing, I think it's taken him a while to get the measure of that. And I think he has to some degree. So if he's re-elected, I think we need to start actually sending delegations to Congress of people like John and me and Claire Lopez and others people on this call to start actually grilling congressmen. I also think we have to start holding our own public hearings. You know, like they used to hold the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings back in the 60s. And they'd have TV and they'd have these communists up there taking the Fifth Amendment, and they would all go into the congressional record. Well, we need to start holding live streamed hearings ourselves, bringing in experts, getting testimony, publicizing it all over the country, focusing on certain areas or certain organizations and that kind of thing. And we shame the FBI and the government into taking action. I think if Trump was a second-term president, I think he'd be unleashed. And I think he'd be very, very willing to take some of the actions that need to be taken. But we would have to provide that public pressure and shame the FBI, shame these other organizations into doing something. If they cannot identify the fact there's a communist movement in this country now, when 20 cities around the country are burning, if they cannot identify that, there's not much hope for them, is there? Well, the public knows it, the public understands it. So if we can provide enough experts and create a liaison with certain good congressmen, I think we can get our own hearings going, maybe even some congressional hearings going. And I think the president would like to actually do some of the kind of things that need to be done. And that is getting serious about internal security in this country again. People need to go to jail and people need to be seen to go to jail.
Absolutely.
That would be my initial suggestions.
Thank you, Trevor. Any other questions? Dana?
Hi. And of course, Keith Ellison being the biggest one that needs to be exposed. Could congressional hearings get him?
Well, I think he's probably committed a lot of felonies in his time in office. And I think even if we went into Minnesota and held a 3-day hearing on Islamist and communist infiltration into Minnesota and live streamed it all over Minnesota and all over the country, imagine the attention that would get. And we give all the bio of Keith Ellison, of Tim Walz, the governor, of that idiot who's now the mayor, all of their colleagues, how it happened, and give a day long or 2 or 3 day long rundown on the infiltration of Minnesota. I think that would rock Keith Ellison's world. I think that would just, that would really attract attention because he is such an egregious character. He's tied to the Iranians. He's tied to the, to the communists. He's tied to the Democratic Socialist America, Freedom Road, CARE, ISNA, MASS, all of it. He's right in the nexus of it. He'd be a great person to focus on, especially being Attorney General, the top lawman in the state. Imagine the fun we could have doing that.
Well, absolutely. I've never seen anything so evil in my life. And coming from Minnesota and seeing the threat, not only like I've talked about in our classes with John and everybody, but to the Indian community. Trevor, he's gone hard after that, and he's spreading all over.
Look, they're trying to make Minnesota a state within a state. They're trying to make it, like some of those cities in Germany, that are controlled by communists and Islamists, and you don't dare go in there.
But that's
what they're trying to do.
What can we do now you know, it's just, I'm dying to know, what can we do to start forming this plan of yours? What can we do on the ground, even within our group right here?
Well, first we'd have to decide it's worth doing and people wanted to do it, but I'm sure we could start doing that. But I also think we should be, you know, we have one critical election in front of us, and elections matter. And I think Minnesota is actually going to make some gains this year. I think the Midwest is going to do well for Trump. I think it's where I'm more worried about is Florida and Texas and the southern states. But you know, if we're going to have any chance of fighting back against this, we're going to win the next election, and then we got to start with a president that is not going to face another election. We're going to start going full on into internal security. Now, I don't think it's going to make much difference between now and the election. We can do what we can, but it's going to get lost in the chatter. But after the election, when the next government's formed and that kind of thing, you know, we can really start coming out swinging. And people, you know, the next election's 4 years away. People will listen.
So I thank you, Trevor,
win the election, focus on winning the election right now, but keep on conspiring amongst ourselves and what we're going to do after it. You know, and I think hearings would be a good way to go.
So let me just say, Dana, in answer to your question about what do we do, one of the things I think is very important is, and I've got this question in the last few days from the articles and some very aggressive statements I've made and videos and interviews I've had, I'm not, because I was asked just this morning, are you advocating revolution? And I said, no. Do you do understand, though, that the other side is conducting a revolution right now, real time? That's what they're doing. And we, as Americans, have a right to defend our families and our communities. And we have a duty to also, by the way.
Yeah.
So when the biggest thing, and Dana, you know this because you've heard us say this, it's at the local level we're going to win or lose this war. And what does that mean? It means you have got to train and organize, and we will help you do that at various levels, to organize and prepare an army of people in your community to identify and dismantle these networks, meaning through all the lines of operation. And some of them may be, hey, we're going to hold hearings, and we don't have to do it at the national level. I can do it at my county level. Who's on my county council that's a communist, that's a jihadi, and throw their ass out at a minimum, throw them out on the street. How many of your pastors in Minneapolis are collaborators with communists and jihadis? A lot of them. But you also have some pastors who are bold and courageous. So identify them. I certainly know some there. Priests, pastors, whether they're evangelical, Catholics, a couple Protestants, not many, but mostly in the evangelical and the Catholic world, you've got pastors who understand what's going on. But just like a politician or anyone in a position of leadership, a mayor, you, the citizen, have to provide them a platform from which they can operate. A police officer or two police officers aren't going to go into the community and start wreaking havoc with communists and jihadis if the chief isn't with them. And the chief isn't going to be with them if the city council and the mayor aren't with them. And the city council and the mayor aren't going to be with them if the people don't grab them by the, proverbially speaking, by the scruff of the neck and say, do your duty and protect me. And if you won't do it, you're out. And you're not out next election cycle, you're out now. We are gonna run our town. Now, it hasn't come to that yet, but I would argue we're very close to that. You, the citizens. Now, I want to say something that Trevor just mentioned. You have to decide, and in Minneapolis, I've been asked this by a number of people that I've worked with for over 10 years in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. What would you recommend? And I would say, number one, you have to understand There is a guy who is in my platoon in Force Recon that lives in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. He asked me 2 days ago, here I am, how can you use me? And I said, well, you do know you're behind enemy lines, right? I mean, if we put it in military jargon, that area is totally controlled by communists and jihadis. From the governor to the mayor to the law enforcement leadership to the U.S. Attorney's Office to the local prosecutors, literally. So is it smart to take a small group of people and charge the hill? No, it is not. Can you create stress within their environment? Yes. Or do you kind of retreat, or we call them in the military, retrograde operations, regroup, and then figure out, because those of you not familiar with Minnesota, you know, you get 20 miles outside of the city limits of Minneapolis, you start bumping into some counties with a lot of patriots in them, and they're not happy. So as we used to say, the goal was you start a couple counties away and you train the police, you train the local officials, you train the citizens. And we said, we will come in. You surround Minneapolis, St. Paul, those counties. But that takes money, it takes determination, it takes will, and you got to do that. And then when you surround counties around Minneapolis, St. Paul, with counties that are now fortified with people that have booted communists and jihadis out and have now fortified themselves because the leadership have said, we're willing to do whatever it takes to protect my community. And you take, you know, Hennepin County and those few counties around there, Minneapolis, and you surround those counties with patriot counties. Now you're engaging the battle. But that's a process. Now that's Minnesota. Now in other states, North and South Dakota, you've got sprinkles of these turds, and you can just literally take the whole arm of the government and smash them and launch them out of the state. And there are legal ways to do this. You can use the police to investigate them. There's all kinds of things. And then you take a place like, you may have, you know, there are I'll take Texas as an example. I will tell you, I believe Houston, Texas is much worse than Dearborn, much worse than Minnesota. It simply hasn't blossomed yet. And what I mean by that is they're still keeping it steady. They know that if they just keep it steady at the right time, they go boom, and they'll make Minneapolis, St. Paul look like they're third graders in the war. You have over 100, you have 108 mosques, and all the ones we've looked at are hostile in Houston. You've got the headquarters, Trevor can talk to this, for the Communist Party in Texas, in Houston. You have a Marxist police chief and a Marxist mayor in Houston. It is devastating. This is Texas. And I believe at last statistics, Houston's the 4th largest city in America. Now, somebody can correct me on that. That's significant. So it is a powder keg waiting to go off. We predicted Minneapolis, St. Paul in 2010. We said there was a problem. We were working with Michelle Bachmann, so President Obama sent over 40,000 Somalis. That was his response to Michelle Bachmann in Minnesota. That was his response. And then by 2013 and 14, you could see trouble was right around the corner. And here we are. So all of this, we're watching it all unfold. What we learned in the last couple of days is, and I shared this Sunday night, at the local and state level, at the federal level, the National Security Advisor, Mr. Pence, Nikki Haley, Jared Kushner, the words coming out of their mouths are narratives from communists. America's a racist nation, yes, but we still shouldn't be setting things on fire. Oh, thanks a freaking lot. Thanks for that backing. That's great. Unbelievable. You want to know why Americans are angry? It's because Republicans are cowards. They're sitting on their hands. Democrats are doing what Democrats have done for 50 years. They're communists. Jihadis do. I have a great deal of respect. I have met the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe, in England, and 3 of the most senior Muslim Brotherhood guys face to face in the United States. And I have a level of respect for them because they know what they're doing, they know what they want, and they'll look you in the eye and they'll tell you. Find me a Republican that will do that besides Mr. Trump. You might be able to name 3, but none of those 3 have spoken articulately about the communist movement, what they're doing, how they're doing it, the jihadis, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what we need to do as a nation to defeat them. Because we're so afraid to say Islam's evil, it's barbaric, communist. They should feel the heel of every patriot in America. I'm going to give you the last word, Trevor.
Well, just I think one thing we need to start doing wherever we are is start making lists of our allies and our targets. List all your allies, all your targets. Now, just the thing on starting a revolution, if we ever devolve into violence, we lose. This has got to be done peacefully. You know, I was talking to a guy in Georgia. He was one of these militia guys, and he said, we're not going to worry about elections. We're not going to worry about changing the culture, civic stuff. All of that's garbage. We're going to march on Washington. And I thought, yeah, right. And I said, well, okay. You imagine if you looked like you were going to be successful, which would be highly doubtful. And think of the carnage that would be in the way. Okay, so if the Democrats looked like they were losing, how long do you think it would be before they brought Russian and Chinese and Venezuelan and Iranian troops onto US soil? And he hadn't even considered the possibility, hadn't realized that the Democrats are working with these people. They're not going to let them give it up. So we have a God-given opportunity here to turn this country around. We should have been lost 10 years ago, but we're not. We should have been lost in the revolution, but we're not. We should have been lost in World War II, but we weren't. We keep going because there's a certain character of the American people. We are a favored nation from God, but we got to do our bit. And if we do our bit, I still think we can turn this around. We can still save the country. And in 5 years' time, we might be looking back at we might be living in a very different country in a very positive way. But if we do nothing, it's going to be a very different country, one that we will just be horrified by. I can guarantee you that. It ain't going to stay the same.
Trevor, thank you so much. I want to say thank you for all the work you've done. And for a guy from outside of the United States.
Yeah.
You were
Sometimes I forget.
You're one incredible patriot, and I'm grateful that you're on our team.
Well, thank you. And I hope everybody could understand my Southern accent tonight. So, but no, look, John, I know you. I know your record. You've been standing against this kind of thing at great cost to yourself for a long time. And you do it because you love your country and you love your kids and you want to stand up for truth. And I'm sure everybody here on this call tonight feels the same way. So I'm very happy to be amongst you guys. So thank you very much.
That's awesome. Thank you. So for all of you, I just want to echo something Trevor just said. There's great hope because we are a people whose founding principles, as articulated in our declaration, it's the law of nature and nature's God. And we are people who live on a moral standard. And although humans over the years have trashed the standard, we can stand in it. And if we have faith and we do the right thing, then no matter what the enemy does to us, we can still live in optimism and joy. And I really believe that. And I will tell you, I know quite a few of you on this call tonight. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to Kat and her team, Chalet and Brad, and all the others, to Ken and everybody that helps you all. Because, look, Jesus did it with 12 men. We have many more than that. We have millions of Americans that are standing behind Mr. Trump, who I believe is a one-man army in Washington, D.C. But we as Americans need to organize at the local level. Spend 90% of your time worrying about the local level, and I believe we can win this war. So thank you all. God bless you, and good night.